Well, I'm joined now by the legendary American biographer Doris Kearns Goodwin, whose latest work is a biography of Roosevelt, The Bully Pulpit. Good evening. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be with you.
All the special relationships between, Reagan and Mrs. Thatcher, and eventually George Bush and Tony Blair, present-day relationships. But what do you make of this harking back to history for British politicians as some kind of, intellectual ballast or exemplar, or to kind of, brownie points for British politicians who actually want to emulate his, American presidents in history?
Well, for an historian like me who spends my life with dead presidents, I think it's great that you have a live politician looking back to the past. And I think there's a real parallel between the turn of the 20th century and today, because you had, after the Industrial Revolution, now as we have after the Technological Revolution, a huge gap between the rich and the poor, huge concentrations of industries in oil, steel, and banking. And Teddy Roosevelt comes on the scene with enormous energy. Indeed, a British Viscount said he had seen two tremendous forces of nature in America, Teddy Roosevelt and Niagara Falls. And he uses that energy to say, I want a fair deal, as was said earlier, a square deal for everyone, rich and poor. So he broke up those trusts. He got into food and drug problems because people had been getting unsanitary meats and unsafe drugs, and he broke up those trusts for the ordinary consumer to have lower prices in railroads and in steel. And he became enormously popular as a result. He was saving capitalism from itself.
Yeah, saving capitalism from what it had become in the Gilded Age. So therefore the Ed Miliband idea is that he is doing the same for the beginning of the 20th century. But do you recognize, or do you think Teddy Roosevelt would have recognized the phrase producer rather than predator capitalism?
Without a question. I mean, that's what he talked about. You'll see, I'll be for corporations as long as they're dealing fairly, but if they're predatory against other people, I'm going against them. I'll be for unions as long as they're dealing fairly. If they're not, I'm going against them. That's what made him have perfect pitch for the time. So I think it really makes sense for a labor leader to say, I want to use government to make markets work so that capitalism works. When it's unfair, I'm going to go against them.
Of course, the case of Ed Miliband, a centre-left Labour leader, gives your book to all his friends, has his fellow shadow cabinet member write about this. Is he kind of hanging on to for the need for this Republican hero? Do you think that is a message that you can imagine the British people actually accepting?
Except that Teddy Roosevelt's an unusual Republican hero. I mean, he was fighting the conservative old guard in his own party. He was trying to bring his party into the modern age. So I think it makes sense. And as I say, it's a great thing, I think, for leaders to find some sort of models in the past. History teaches us things. If you have to start all over again, then you're not learning from the past.
But it's interesting because can you imagine American politicians looking to British history for their exemplars?
Well, you would hope so. I mean, I would hope that at certain moments, if we were in a moment where we needed a Winston Churchill, I'd bring him back from the dead in 2 seconds. I mean, he's my hero. So yes, I think maybe it seems more one-sided from your point of view, but there's got to be reasons for us to look at Britain as well. I think we can learn from each other. The pond isn't that big.
You have done notable biographies of several American presidents, another Roosevelt, of course, and other people. But you've said in a recent interview that the only criterion for your next book is that it's going to be about a woman, a powerful woman. Have you made your choice?
Well, I am thinking still of that as my next big biography because I've lived with so many men for so long. But I think I'm going to do a book about leadership, bringing all my guys together in one room, Lincoln, FDR, Teddy Roosevelt, and JFK and LBJ, and figuring out what traits they all share together. Because there is a certain universal quality to leadership, whether in public or private life. And I'd like to think I've learned that by spending 40 years with these characters from the White House.
Doris, thank you very much indeed.